The attic itself was a world lost, hidden in the grime of ages and smelling of antique wood. In the thicket of toys amassed in the heyday of childhood, antique books, and heirlooms, one little photograph glowed with sunlight, a moment frozen in time. It was of two young, promising figures whose faces wrinkled into smiles beneath the shade of an oak. The photo had been shoved aside, as if it had been put there by design, but now it seemed to scream, wishing to be noticed. For Sarah, that photo stirred something deep inside of her, a heat that had grown cold a long time ago, entombed beneath years in silence. It had been years since she'd last laid eyes on him, and longer still since they'd shared anything more than fleeting memories. Life had gone in other directions, but the picture was like an invitation. An invitation to remember, to reconnect, and perhaps even to rediscover what so easily had been beautiful between them once. And though the dust settled over her, covering her, Sarah knew some memories, even after all those years, never really disappeared. They just waited, quietly, for just the right moment to come back. Chapter 1: The Photograph in the Attic. The attic was always a storehouse of forgotten things, secreted and safeguarded from the ravages of time. Sarah was never particularly attracted to the space. It was dark, filled with the scent of old cardboard, and stacked high with things that seemed to belong to another era. But today, as she climbed the creaking stairs, she felt an odd pull, as though something was waiting for her. She'd stopped by today to go through some of the old boxes, part of the inevitable task of going through her parents' house after their passing. Everything had seemed to contain a little bit of her childhood, a crumpled drawing, old clothes, long-forgotten toys. But one box, tucked behind a stack of old books that had faded to yellow, caught her eye. It was a small, unmarked cardboard box, its edges frayed and worn with age. She hesitated for a moment before lifting the lid, the sweet scent of must and remembrance filling her nostrils. Inside, amidst a mess of ancient receipts and news clippings yellowed with age, was one photo. Her heart skipped a beat as she gazed at it. It was a photo of her and Tom, one taken many years earlier in the shade of their oak tree. They were both laughing, unaware of the hand of time, frozen in an instant of simple joy. Tom's eyes were filled with the same unbridled joy that Sarah remembered so clearly. She held the photo in her hands, allowing the warmth of the memory to seep into her skin. It had been so long since she'd considered them. The photo seemed to bring it all back in an instant. The summers they'd spent together, the quiet moments that had then seemed so deep. It was a reminder of a time when distance hadn't crept between them, when life hadn't taken them on separate paths. For a time, Sarah simply stared at the photo, the weight of nostalgia pressing down on her. She had not realized she had missed those days so much, missed him so much. Slowly, a longing flavored with the soft ache of loss washed over her. Was it possible, she wondered, to reach back to something so long past? As she replaced the picture in the box carefully, the question lingered with her: would this random discovery lead her back to something she had long since abandoned, or was it merely a memory, destined to remain forever concealed in the past? Chapter 2: Letters Never Sent. The photograph had stirred something in Sarah, but it was the letters she later found that actually unraveled the thread of her past. The box she had found earlier held more than recollections of photographs, it was a treasure trove of forgotten words. Thumbing through the yellowed papers, she came across a bundle of letters tied with a faded red ribbon. The writing was unmistakable, it was Tom's. Her fingers trembled as she unwound the ribbon and began to read. The first letter had been written years earlier, just before they had drifted apart. His words, infused with longing and secret love, poured out onto the page. Each sentence looked as though it were filled with an intimacy that Sarah had not known existed, a gentleness hidden under the years. As she read them, she could have sworn she heard him, so soft and hesitant, as though he'd penned these words with the utmost delicacy. "I wish we had more time," one of the letters began. "There is so much I need to say, but I do not know how. Were I only brave enough to tell you just how much you mean to me." Sarah's heart ached as she moved from one letter to the next. They wrote of emotions unspoken, of times they had shared and ones they never mustered the courage to speak. The more she read, the more she realized that there had been so much more between them than she had ever known. Tom had loved her, but somewhere along the way, they had both been too afraid of the intensity of that love. She halted when she reached the final letter, the ink smeared from decades of neglect. There was no signature, merely an unfinished sentence that trailed off. "I wish I had told you." The words floated in the air, a query without an answer. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the weight of the letters settle into her chest. Had she been blind to his feelings all along? Or had they both just been too afraid to see what was right in front of them? The letters were evidence of what they had almost had, but never quite realized. They were words left unsaid, feelings left unspoken, and vows left unfulfilled. The silence in the room was thicker now, heavy with the aftermath of unspoken things. The question remained suspended: would she ever be free to confront the past, or would these letters forever remain a lost fragment of a love that had been lost from their hands? Chapter 3: The Reunion Café. Nothing had changed in the town since Sarah departed. The streets were lined with the same cheerful, weathered brick buildings, and the same inviting cafes decorated the corners like small reminders of something that was only recalled in dreams. It was a Sunday afternoon when she walked into the same cafe she had been in so many times with Tom. The atmosphere was serene, soft murmurs by a few clients scattered at the tables, the voices soothing into the warm ambience. Sarah had made a quick visit to the town for a few moments, never expecting to find anything more than a small fragment of closure. But as soon as she opened the door, she was consumed by a strange sense of nostalgia. The air was filled with the scent of freshly ground coffee blended with a faint smell of baked goods, and for one moment, she could have sworn she heard his laughter ringing off the walls of the room. She remained standing by the counter, preoccupied, when a voice snapped her out of her trance. "Sarah?" She turned around slowly, her beating heart. And there, in the doorway, was Tom. Older, of course, but the eyes were the same, those blue eyes that had left her with the sensation of being the sole creature in existence. His smile was uncertain at first, hesitant, as if he too had been surprised by the encounter. "I didn't expect to find you here," he said to her, his words choked with emotion. Sarah's lips parted to answer, but the words hung in her throat. It had been years since she'd seen him last, and yet, there, in that moment, it was all so close, so near. The weight of all that they had left unsaid came crashing down upon her then. Tom moved forward a step, a hint of doubt in his step. "It's been a while," he continued quietly. "How have you been?" "I'm fine," Sarah replied, though she wasn't quite so certain that she believed it herself. She had fought for years to move on from him, but now that he was standing in front of her, all of the suppressed emotion that she had pushed aside years ago came rushing back. They just both stood there for a minute, not sure what to do, as though neither of them had a clue where to begin. But during the silence of that moment, Sarah felt for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Something about the fact that Tom was standing before her, after all those years apart, it made her wonder if it weren't too late to find once again what they once had shared. Chapter 4: Echoes of Laughter. It was a chilly autumn afternoon when Sarah and Tom went for a walk around the town. The streets, which they knew so well, seemed different now, as if the years had shrouded them with a new, softer beauty. They strolled side by side, not uttering much at first, but the comfortable silence between them was unlike the awkwardness of their last conversation. It was as if the first few steps of something different but not different at the same time. Their travels led them to the park, a place that had been of great significance in their shared past. The very same bench alongside the fountain, the very same sweeping oak tree that had witnessed so much of their debates. Under its boughs, it was where they spent hours upon hours, talking of anything and everything, making promises which they thought would last a lifetime. Sarah folded down onto the bench, a stray leaf dislodged from her lap as she did. Tom sat with her, glancing at the tree as though mesmerized in its shadow. "I used to remember we would come here and just speak for hours and hours," Sarah whispered, with a tinge of nostalgia present in her words. "We never thought things could ever be any different." Tom's eyes softened and he smiled weakly. "Yeah, I thought we'd always have this," he said, his voice weighted with the weight of time. "I thought nothing ever could get between us." They sat in silence for a minute together, both lost in the sounds of the past. A faint giggling from the children in the park outside, of fleeting laughter created in both an unusual feeling of warmth and a sharp, painful pang in Sarah's heart. The world, as if it progressed from everywhere else, but here in this place had stayed arrested, standing still as in a suspended time. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't drifted apart?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Tom shifted, his gaze meeting hers. "Every day," he admitted. "I don't think I ever stopped wondering." For the first time in years, Sarah felt a sense of understanding, of something that had been left unspoken for so long. The laughter, the love, the moments shared, they had been true, even if time had forgotten them. And now, sitting here with Tom, she realized that some things never actually go away. They stay in the places we return to, in the memories we hold on to, and in the quiet spaces between the words we speak. Chapter 5, The Things We Didn't Say. Evening was gathering, casting deep shadows across the park as Sarah and Tom were beside the bench, the night air growing cold with the advance of darkness. Both of them had remained stationary for a considerable while, immobilized by the seriousness of what they had been discussing. They had spoken of the past, of the years gone to loss, and yet there was still something unsaid between them, a tension, a question neither of them knew how to pose. It was Tom who eventually broke his silence. "You know," he began, his tone softer than before, "there were so many things I never said to you. Things I should have told you then." She faced him, heart pounding in chest. She had no doubt that she knew what he was thinking. There'd always been stuff between them, stuff they had avoided, tucked away behind silence and fear of facing the fact. "You don't have to say them now," Sarah breathed, her fingernails tugging along the curve of bench. "I get it. Life got in the way. We grew." But Tom shook his head, his eyes clashing with hers in a force that made her heart skip a beat. "No, I need to tell you," he said, his voice firm now. "I need you to know that I never gave up loving. I thought of you every single day, but I was too scared to call. Too scared I'd blown it." A lump had formed in Sarah's throat, and for a moment she could hardly speak. She had struggled so long to move on from their breakup, to convince herself that it was for the best. But hearing Tom talk, seeing the desperation in his eyes, knocked down the barriers she had constructed. "I was frightened, too," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I figured if I kept those around, it would make everything worse. So I pushed them off. And maybe that's the reason we never spoke what we should have." The silence afterward was different, softer, wider. There was weight to their unspoken truths, but relief as well. The things they never uttered, the emotions they'd concealed, were now out. And in that instant, Sarah realized that at times it took years of quiet to find the right words, and decades to muster up the courage to say them. Chapter 6, A Winter Walk. There had been a faint snowfall during the night, the winter's first snow, and the pavements and the trees were draped in a pale, glistening white. Sarah stepped out, the biting morning air nipping her cheeks, and took a long, cool breath. There was something about winter's silence that made everything sound more intimate, more contemplative. She had not expected Tom to join her for the walk, but when she heard him knock on her door that morning with a quiet smile on his face, she could not turn him down. They walked purposefully along the roads, the snow crunching beneath their boots. The world seemed muffled, as though the very movement of time had slowed. Their small talk was at a minimum, but effortless. One step they made seemed to erase the distance that had grown up between them after all those years. Every now and then their gloved palms would brush together, sending a momentary thrill of warmth down Sarah's skin, reminding them that they existed, that they still stood side by side. "I loved the snow," Tom answered after a pause, his breath coming in small puffs. "It always felt like the world was fresh, like you could start over." Sarah smiled softly, turning to him. "I know what you mean. It makes everything feel quieter. They arrived at a small park, the branchy limbs of the trees thrusting up towards the light gray sky, their lines drawn against the white. The air was nipping, but it was good, earthy somehow. As they walked along the frozen lake, Sarah glanced at Tom and wondered if he was recalling the same things she was, the winter afternoon spent here, the first kiss they had shared beside the frozen lake, the promises they had made. "I never imagined we'd wind up like this," Sarah whispered, her voice carried barely above the wind. "That we'd drift apart, lose contact." Tom's eyes clung to hers, an expression of suffering passing across his face. "So was I. I suppose I was afraid of having to confront what we were to each other. And then, before I could do something, it was too late." For a moment, Sarah did not know what to do. There was sadness in Tom's words, an apology that was mixed with them. And yet, there was something to be forgiven in their bluntness, in coming to terms with past mistakes. She nodded slowly, her breath tight in her throat. "I think," she began, "I've wasted a lot of time hoping I could make things different. But maybe it's enough to just be here, now." The words hung between them, fragile but true. Walking on, the snow falling softly around them, Sarah realized that some things in life couldn't be undone, but that didn't mean they couldn't still be beautiful. Sometimes, it was enough to simply start again, even in the quietest of moments. Chapter 7, The Box of Keepsakes. The box had been hidden in the rear of Sarah's closet, buried under a pile of old papers and half-filled photo albums. It had always been there, but she had never quite been able to bring herself to open it. Not until now. With Tom beside her on the couch, his presence a steady comfort, Sarah slowly opened the lid. There was a pile of keepsakes, shards and pieces of a life lived years and years before. The first thing Sarah took off was a little wooden keepsake box, one she had received as a gift from Tom on her birthday last year when they broke up. It was beautifully carved with intricate designs, the type of thing that said more for thoughtfulness than spend. She cradled it in the palm of her hand for a moment, the touch of it bringing a clash of emotions, love, loss, and everything in between. Tom watched her, his face calm, as she opened the box. Inside it was a letter, yellow with age. She read the words to herself silently. "For Sarah, with all my heart." She hadn't recalled this note, recalled how much Tom had loved her. It was a token of his love, one of those little, private gestures that mattered so much more than anything purchased. Sarah set down the box and picked up another item, a piece of an older map. They had employed it for a trip to the mountains that was a thrilling weekend of excitement and serene afternoons that seemed to drag on forever. She could practically hear Tom's voice as he had expended so much enthusiasm detailing the trip, his enthusiasm catching. "This map," Sarah waved it in the air, "we spent hours making plans for that trip. We thought we'd have so many more adventures like it." Tom nodded, his expression soft. "I remember. It seemed like there was so much still ahead. I never imagined the way it would all fall apart." Sarah flinched at those words but did not step back. They were speaking truths now, ones that they had both avoided for too long. She put the map on the table and took up the next item from the box, a photograph, fringed with wear. It was of the two of them, smiling under the same oak tree where they'd spent so many afternoons. The photo was a beautiful capture of youth, of a day they had not yet let fear and uncertainty erect barriers between them. "Do you think," Sarah whispered against the photograph, her fingers nearly touching it, "that some memories just stay in the past?" Tom hesitated before answering. "Maybe. Or maybe some memories, like this one, just need to be remembered. They don't have to make us, but they make us who we are." As Sarah shut the box, she understood something. The mementos, the photos, the presents, they were not just things. They were reminders of a moment when everything was easy, when love came without effort. And even though the years had altered them both, the heat of those memories, the common past, was something they could take with them. into whatever future they chose to create. Chapter 8, A New Beginning. The sun was setting, casting the little town in its golden glow as Sarah and Tom walked together down the charming streets. The past 2 days had been a haze. Emotions they had pushed deep inside themselves so long ago had come flooding back, and scars of the past had been ignited. But through the memories and the gentle awakenings, something had shifted between them. It was as if, after all the years, they were looking at each other anew, without the fog of mistakes and regrets befogging their eyes. They had spent the night wandering through the town, visiting places that mattered to them, each step leading them closer to something unseen but undoubtedly real. There was possibility in the air, a feeling that they could begin again, no matter how much time had passed. Tom skidded to a halt at the corner, looking at Sarah with a look of sincerity in his eyes. "I know we can't just start over," he whispered. "We can't erase the years between us. But maybe we don't have to. Maybe we can start over. A new chapter, with no expectations, just us. Here." Sarah's heart expanded at his words. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what the future held. She wasn't clinging to the past, to memories that had soured with time. What mattered now was the present, the potential to rebuild what they'd lost, or to build something new from scratch on the foundation of their past. "I think I'd like that," Sarah said, her voice steady but filled with hope. A new chapter. They stood there for a moment, the quiet settling around them like a soft embrace. The world seemed to pause, holding its breath, waiting for them to take the next step. They had been given a valued gift, the opportunity to start over, not as who they once were but as who they were now. The past was no longer something that burdened them, it was a lesson, a stepping stone to greater things. Tom smiled, his hand extending to brush Sarah's lightly. The silent gesture was like a vow, a look that they would never be alone in the world again regardless of what the future held. And so, as the last light of day dipped below the horizon, Sarah and Tom stepped into the unknown together. Their path wasn't perfect, and it didn't have to be. What mattered was that they were no longer afraid to walk it. They had learned from the past, but now they were ready to face the future, one day at a time. The years that had once come between Sarah and Tom were now not so much an abyss but a series of stepping stones that had led them to the place where they could begin again what they had lost. Time had changed both of them, yet in so many ways, they were the same people who had known laughter and dreams before. It was no longer about reclaiming what had been lost, but about creating something new from the memories they had shared. Standing at the intersection of their shared past and uncertain future, Sarah knew that the familiarity of a shared memory was not something lost, it was a foundation. It was the light that glowed in the darkness, a reminder that no matter how far they had strayed from each other, they could always find their way back. In the quiet hours that lay ahead, they realized their journey had barely begun. They had learned that love, as life, was not an ending but a path. One they were ready to face squarely, open-hearted and with the courage to accept what the path would bring.